Good evening, fellow unselects. Whether you're a seasoned public official, a curious student, or a concerned neighbor, this is the show for you. We are not the elite. We are not the chosen. We are not the elected. We are the unselects, the ones who ask questions, the ones who challenge the norms, and the ones who refuse to be mere spectators. We're not here to judge. We're here to understand, to ask questions, and possibly have a little fun along the way. I'm Greg Richards.
And I'm Brian Costello, and we are the Unselects.
Good evening, fellow Unselects. In tonight's episode, we seek to answer the following questions. What is the role of a town meeting member, and how do we get better representation?
Tonight, we have a special guest, one of the newest town meeting members, Caroline Macomber. I personally know her as a friend and a neighbor, but she is one of the most vocal town meeting members we've had, and we're excited to have her. She represents Precinct 9. Caroline, I have a couple questions for you. Why did you become a town meeting member? What instigated it?
Yeah, so thanks, Brian. So there were a couple of reasons. The primary one was that I was growing really concerned with the amount of development that I was seeing on Route 20, which is right near Precinct 9 where we live. And also our schools. I was also becoming concerned with sort of the state of our schools, what's been happening in them. And I felt it was really my civic duty to kind of represent my neighborhood and speak up. I didn't feel it was fair of me to complain about the way things were going if I didn't try to get a seat at the table and make my opinion heard. So,
you were also one of the sticker candidates for school committee. Tell us a little bit about your thought there.
Yeah, so what I was finding when I was watching school committee meetings and sort of reading up on things, it seemed like everything was always unanimous. Everything was always supported. It didn't feel like anyone was ever asking any questions about why would we approve this versus having further discussion. From a budgetary standpoint, I felt like there were better things that we could be doing. And again, I just thought, you know what, I can't complain about this if I don't try and get my name in the hat. So I ran on a sticker campaign. From what I was told, I think I had the most stickers of any candidate, which was pretty exciting. But yeah, unfortunately, I didn't get on this go round, but definitely something I'll be, continuing to look at in the future. So.
Cool. And so one of the things I think we want to show here is not only with the newest, but definitely the most participation. So we went ahead and we put together a little best of from town meeting here from Caroline Macomber. So we're going to go to that now.
This is my first town meeting. Caroline Macomber, Precinct 9. Caroline Macomber, Precinct 9. Caroline Macomber, Precinct 9. Caroline Macomber, Precinct 9. Caroline Macomber, Precinct 9.
Ms. Macomber.
Caroline Macomber, Precinct 9.
Ms. Macomber.
Caroline Macomber, Precinct 9.
Ms. Macomber.
Caroline Macomber, Precinct 9. 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 Promise this is a quick one. Caroline Macomber, Precinct 9. I think this sounds awesome.
Based off what I saw there, I believe you stood up, I think I counted 20 times. There may have been a few others that I missed where you actually didn't use your name. But I guess, what was your thought process saying, hey, not only am I going to attend the meeting, but I'm really going to participate? Because if you looked at across all of town meeting, there was probably 10, 15 maybe out of the 240 town meeting members who actually said something. So what led you to do that, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, again, Brian knows just from being my neighbor, I'm pretty vocal. If I have an opinion, I'm going to share it. And I'm also someone that does my homework. So in preparation for town meeting, people may recognize this. This was my prep work for town meeting. So I spent about 2.5 days just reading the articles, going back and looking at previous master plans for the town, previous budget documents, and I had a lot of questions. Yeah. And so I felt I would not be doing my neighbors service if I didn't ask those questions on their behalf. So while at times I did feel somewhat silly getting up to Caroline Macomber, Precinct 9, repeatedly, I just felt that if I had questions, it was the right thing to do. I needed to ask those questions, especially given that it didn't really look like everybody that was supposed to be there was there. So I thought, gosh, if there's town meeting members that aren't here that should be here, maybe they had questions they would have asked otherwise. So I'll just ask them because you know what, I've got them.
Yeah. And I think one of the things you brought to our attention that I want to bring up here that was part of your preparation, I know, and it is in the town meeting handbook that's sent out to every town meeting member, is a sheet. And at the top of the sheet, it says think, and it's provided by the Finance Committee, I believe. And one of the things I found interesting when you would send it along for us is I love these questions, right? I think we can all agree that these 10 questions, if you're actually honest in answering these, I think we do a lot of things differently as a town, right? So if these truly are our guiding principles, we should actually paste these up in the select board meeting room. I think that should be on the wall. So I don't know if we want to take a couple of minutes to go through a couple of these things, Brian, and what jumps out at you, I think, when we kind of look at some of these questions.
Yeah, these are great questions. And like you said, I wish everybody could have them in front of them like at all times. Anytime there's a vote, we should almost take time and say, wait a minute, let's look at these checklists, right? Can we afford it, right? Number 2, pretty simple. Can we afford it? And that's really important because what does it mean to afford something? Is it within the budget? Are we looking for grants? Are we looking for other things? What will it cost ultimately? I think oftentimes, especially in the debates we've had recently, the MBTA 3A and so on, oftentimes we're looking at things and we're saying, well, it's not a big cost today. It's sort of the subtext. Right. The reality is our ultimate cost is usually extremely high. But what I love about this is it does say things about the Constitution. Does it affect your basic liberties? Does it recognize the importance of the individual and the minority, right? These are the foundations of our republic, which is in the checklist. And I don't think we pay much attention to this. I was shocked when I saw this, to be quite frank, because I said, wow, if everybody actually had to sign something saying they read this and they would adhere to it, I think we'd have maybe a different level of activity and ability in our town meeting.
Absolutely. So, Caroline, what struck you about these?
So, it was interesting to me. So I'm not a lawyer, but I'm fascinated by the law. And as I read through this in my preparation, I was like, gosh, this almost sounds like jury instructions, right? And so if you ever get called to jury duty, you get your instructions when you're deliberating. And I thought, my gosh, hopefully this is what every town meeting member is thinking of every time a question is voted on. And it just really, I found very surprising. I found this after I had attended a number of select board meetings, planning board meetings, and it didn't feel like these questions were, I guess, top of mind, maybe in their own committee votes. So it really struck me as almost at odds with what I was seeing happening in these meetings. And I felt that for me personally, it was my duty to answer these questions for every single article on that town meeting warrant. And I think, it's something hopefully every town meeting member, if they have not already looked at this, hopefully they, make it more available in future meetings, because I do think it's important, right? It's our job. It's
almost like skipping the forward to a book, right?
Yeah.
People just skip forward to look at the warrants.
Yeah.
But this is actually one of the things that grounds you in the seriousness of the job you chose.
Yeah.
Right. Because essentially what it's telling you is you don't need to be an expert on anything in any of the warrant articles, right?
Right.
You can actually fall back to these 10 questions and walk through them for everything and answer them based off your own belief system and come to a conclusion. You don't need to be an expert on zoning. You don't need to be an expert on finance. You just use these as your guiding principles. And if you could answer these honestly, you can come to your own conclusion on how you should vote.
Yeah.
Fair?
I mean, I look at number 6 and 7, and to me, I don't know that these are questions that we're responding to well. So is it a foot in the door proposition? I think we have a lot of those that were warrant articles this year. It's kind of that if you give a mouse a cookie, right? It's just all of a sudden it kind of snowballs. And then having too much power in the hands of one individual or group, right? One thing in my preparation for town meeting that I noticed was there were a lot of families that had multiple town meeting members. And so it just to me sort of felt like, well, gosh, should the power all be in the hands of a few families in town? Because it sort of looks like it is. And that doesn't seem right. We go to question 8. Is it recognizing the importance of the individual and the minority? Well, if, a good chunk of the people voting at town meeting are all part of the same family, then,
Fair.
I don't know that they can represent the interests of all the other people in town.
Yeah. So I know we'll come back to these questions a few times, not only throughout today, but maybe in future episodes as well. But one of the things I think I wanted to talk about was about the participation in town meeting, like we talked about how many times you got up. And one of the things I found interesting is we kind of would go back to like what Brian and I talked about when we started going into finance committee meetings or planning board meetings. There's a clip I want to show here, and it's back in an April finance committee meeting, and it's a response to one member of the finance committee talking about participation of town meeting members. And at the time, I didn't really know how to take it, to be honest. I thought it was like, ooh, that's kind of a rough take. But I think we'll talk a little bit about why. I'm not sure I love the way that it was said, but I understand now, I think, why he said that. So we're going to go to that clip now.
How many town meeting members are here? And how many town meeting okay, 10. How many town meeting members are there in the community?
200, well, 240.
They don't show up. I don't know how I'm going to educate.
I know, so that's,
I can't help you with that. The ones who do show up,
But time
hopefully get
helps.
educated and do the right thing. I have spoken at town meeting, asking people to come to these meetings, because that's where you can ask questions. I have spoken at many of these meetings, but again, no one watches it, so I don't know what you want me to say about educating the town meeting
I just
members.
wish we had a little more time to be able to educate the
3
town
years.
meeting members, because a lot of people in the community are
I will argue
advocating a
they
certain
won't,
way.
they don't want to be educated.
Whole different.
Let's get
I don't know
back to the
how we're
public.
going to educate them.
Yeah, let's get
I
back
am
to
very happy you people are, you've shown up here and I'm listening to what you're saying, but I don't know, we could take 5 years. I don't think you're going to educate that many
Yeah.
people.
I think you can see the frustration in Dennis, and I think that frustration, while you're right, it probably might have been handled in a different way. I actually sense the same type of frustration, because after going to town meeting and seeing a lack of participation, I would say, you can get it. And those people actually showed up, right?
Right.
The amount of people that don't show up. And I think what it shows is it's incumbent upon us as citizens to activate the citizenry. It's not up to the town officials. It is up to us. And I think that's a learning point here.
Right. And they did reiterate. I mean, I think the town, tried when they say, hey, they're sending out weekly emails to town meeting members. So I don't know how many communications did you get?
See, I didn't receive those
town.
because I had just
Oh,
become a
okay.
town meeting member.
So you'll-
So I actually got my packet of information with the warrant about maybe 7 days before.
Sure. Okay.
But I think the others did receive
Yeah,
stuff
and I
further
think
in
they were getting
advance.
weekly emails, and there was a lot of information in there about, when you can come to, whether it's finance committee, when they're reviewing the articles, open, public hearings on every warrant article, whether it was the planning board or finance committee or select board. So I do believe the town is trying, but I think to your point, Brian, the onus is on those who've raised their hand and said, yes, I would like to be a town meeting member, that there is a minimum expectation. You should be aware. You should do some research. And if you're unwilling to do that, maybe that is not the right job for you. So I want to take a little bit further here, right? Because I think it's important to look at attendance and participation by our town meeting members. So what I'm showing here, okay, this is a slide if we would go back 2 years to May of 2022. So this shows the May town meeting in 2022, October, because for those who don't know, there is typically 2 town meetings a year. There is one that's in the spring, which is the primary, and then there's usually a secondary that's reserved in the fall, the October timeframe, that typically will have less articles to be voted on. And so we're looking here from 22, 23, and then the most recent one just here in May 20th. So what this shows is the orange bar is the number of town meeting members who showed up that given day. So this is by day. So there's 240 town meeting members. The ones in blue are those who did not show up. So you can see that the high water mark is 195 out of 240 showing up. All right. I think it's a little easier here on the slide to look at it percentage-wise. So we can say that at best, slightly over 80% of the town meeting members show up. And every single time, if there's 2 days, right, that second day falls off and the fall one is not as popular as the spring. So we see somewhere between, on the worst case, look at that, 66% of the people show up. A third of the town meeting doesn't show up in the October meetings. And every time the second day, we really fall off on attendance. So that's not good.
Yeah, that's
That's
quite
really
terrible.
not good.
I mean, that scares me. It does. I mean, town meeting is where we vote on decisions that impact not only our current lives here in Shrewsbury, but also the future of Shrewsbury.
Town
Those
meeting
numbers are
is the
scary.
legislative body, right?
Yes.
And again, what Greg and I talked about was you raise your hand voluntarily to do this.
Yep.
So if it's consistently that low, it shows that what is the reason people are actually wanting to be on the town meeting if it's not to show up at the
Right.
town meeting. Now, we always know things happen.
Right.
Things come along. But as we know, looking at these slides, there's a consistent pattern here that we need to figure out how to fix in this town.
Right. I share the same belief, and when I look at it, there is the name of the role is very clear as to what your role is. It's town meeting member means town meeting is your primary role to attend. So taking this one step further, right, and because they are elected and they are on a ballot, we raised your hand, you went out, you got signatures from 10 people that says you want to do this, we are showing a list, all right? So there's 43 out of the 240 town meeting members who have not been at town meeting half the time. So these are everybody listed who's missed 50% or greater of the available town meeting dates. There's a list on the left that have missed 7 in a row. So my action and my request, if you're a town meeting member and have not attended 7 in a row, go to the town clerk and resign your post. There's somebody else in town who is more than willing and who will show up. So Brian and I, who are not town meeting members today, I'm definitely going to be running next time, have attended 2, right? So we've attended more town meeting dates in the last 3 years than the first 2 columns on this chart.
Yeah, and I would argue, I'd take it a step further, 6 and 7. If you've missed 6 out of 7 or 7 out of 7, you're clearly not interested. You haven't made an effort, and it's time to resign the post and give it to somebody who actually will show up and make a difference at the town.
Now, there is some precincts here that I think are they're suffering. 10 has got to do a better job. There's a lot of, I see there's 7 people represented out of 24 in precinct 10.
And even missing 5 out of 7 of the last meetings, I mean, that's a substantial, I would say, statistically significant amount of the meetings to miss. And then when you look at that third column, you see also it looks like precincts 2 and 5 have a bit of an attendance problem as well.
Absolutely. So we're not going to go through here and call out every name. You can see it for yourself. Those of you know who you are. But I would give a serious consideration to say if this isn't something you can commit to, if you're not committed to attending town meeting, don't be a town meeting member because there's other people who would do it. And some people don't want to run don't want to feel like they're running against somebody. That's just not in them. But they would love to participate. So I think it's something we definitely would encourage those who are on this list to either start showing up or consider stepping down.
Or if for example, you're in college and you're not home in May or October, maybe town meeting member isn't the best job for you until you're in Shrewsbury more full-time. Or perhaps someone watching this might look at this list and say, oh gosh, that's one of my neighbors, they passed away a year ago. By all means, let the town clerk's office know. It could be that no one's aware of it.
So
Yeah, this isn't a glamorous job. It's not going to be something that's going to enhance your LinkedIn.
Right.
It's not fun. It's a lot of work, as Caroline has shown. So no hard feelings.
no.
Just give somebody else a shot.
Other thing I wanted to touch upon quick when it comes to town meeting is this concept of vacancies, okay? So on the ballot, we saw that this year where there's 8 typically per precinct that are up for reelection. There's 24 per precinct total, 10 precincts, that gives you 240 town meeting members. If somebody leaves town, they can resign their seat if they no longer want to be in town meeting. On the ballot, there is to fill a vacancy slot in another location versus the original 8. One thing that's interesting when we dug into this if you look at our bylaws, which of course everybody has Appendix A, Chapter 553, Acts of 1953 memorized.
Well, it's actually, I have it right here. I have the town bylaws. It was part of my
So
town meeting.
in those bylaws, Section 11 does describe how to handle a vacancy. And the thing that I find interesting is the way I interpret it, maybe I'm wrong, there should never be a vacancy on a ballot in the town of Shrewsbury. Because what is supposed to happen, if you read this, is that if there's a vacancy, you actually go back to the prior election. The person who got the next highest number of votes will be offered the position. So if 9 people ran, whoever didn't get in, they will be offered that position if a vacancy comes up. If there's nobody there or there's no other seat there, it actually says that the town meeting members in that precinct are supposed to come together, nominate their own clerk, and vote in people. That's what the bylaws say. So I don't understand, I guess I'm curious to understand why are we doing things the way we are, because it looks like the bylaw instructs us to handle that a different way. Mm-hmm. I just found it interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on past the town meeting members in attendance for a second, the thing I wanted to talk about next was another procedural piece in town meeting itself. What I found was interesting was the layout of town meeting. So I have a screenshot here, okay? I want to talk through this a little bit. So we'll walk through this a little bit. For those who weren't at town meeting, have never seen town meeting, this is an image of the stage. And on the stage on the left, I tried to highlight it the best I could here. You have the finance committee, or at least 6 out of 9 of the finance committee on stage. Then you have 2 additional on the floor. And then on the right-hand side, you have town council, the town clerk, the moderator, town manager, and then 2 members of the select board. You can see Mr. Samia and Mrs. Flynn. And then on the floor, you have the remaining 3 select board members. Now, here's my question. Why is this set up this way? And the reason I say this is what I want to talk about. The only person in the finance committee that spoke for 2 days is the chair. And the chair only says the finance committee approves this 9-0, 8-0, or whatever that actual vote count is. And the only thing the select board chairman and vice chair is they read what the actual, I motion, article, whatever, read it out, and then there's a second. No other speech from them. So what's your take, I guess, either one of you, on the layout here? What does that say by the layout?
Well, it feels, I don't want to say adversarial, but it doesn't feel like everyone's on equal footing. And right, so if we look at, to your earlier point, the structure of town meeting and just the structure of our town government, the select board is sort of like the executive branch of our government. The town meeting members are like the legislative body. When we look at this, I mean, it almost looks like a bunch of Supreme Court justices kind of reigning, presiding over, the meeting. It just, I don't know. It doesn't really sit right with me.
Yeah, it's a little bit, I think it's there for pomp and circumstance a little bit, to show off a little bit. And I think it also, maybe unintentionally, as a town meeting member sits there, thinks that these are the people that are in charge. When in reality, it's the people in front of all those people sitting down in the chairs that are the ones that make the decisions in town, or have the ones that are able to make the most decisions in town.
Yeah.
So it does feel like a teacher-student situation, when the reality is the students are on stage and it's the teachers in the audience.
Yeah, and the other piece to note too, they say like, I put my pants on one leg at a time. Every one of those select board members, and I believe most of the finance committee, maybe it's not all of them, are also town meeting members. They have the stickers on.
Yeah.
So they have their vote counts, to your point, the same as everybody else's. So if I was in charge, which I'm not, I had my chance, I didn't win. If I was in charge, I would actually only have on stage, I would have the finance committee chair, because that's fine that he reads out as the chairman of the finance committee, here's how we recommend the article. Okay. I would have, it's fine to have the chair and the vice chair of the select board. I would have one table, right, with those members. The remaining balance of the finance committee and the select board, they should be sitting in the crowd, or if there is a potential question they need to answer, they can sit on the bottom right, because the front rows on the right-hand side there are for department heads, of the DPW, Selco, so who could answer questions regarding specific articles. Yeah. And that's to me, I guess more equitable, and I think shows that everybody here has got one voice, one vote, right? So it's a little tweak and a change, but I don't think that's a unreasonable request to make. I think of a future change potentially to town meeting.
I mean,
Thoughts?
even look at, the town budget, what's our biggest spend? Usually it's schools. I would
Yep.
even suggest maybe the superintendent should be on stage, or maybe the fire chief and the police chief. I mean, those are some of our bigger ticket. I forget the gentleman's name from DPW, but he had a whole slew of questions. He had to keep getting called up to the microphone to answer. And, it's just one of those, I think, to your point, like, it seems more pomp and circumstance than the actual practical, what would make sense in this situation? Who are the people that are answering these questions, right? So, yeah.
Or I think one of the things that I liked when you asked, I think you were asking some questions when you stood up around what is the reason for this to be brought forth? Essentially, why, if we're going to do the zoning change, can you explain what's driving that decision?
Right.
And I found that there often weren't given a very good explanation. But I think that's a valid point. Like, who brought this up? Who thought that this was something important enough to bring in front of the legislative body? And it just helped me understand.
Yeah. I feel like I was often given a response that was not to the question that I had asked. But yeah, and I think that's a question that should be asked for every single article. Who brought this up? And I feel like when it was a citizen's petition, it was made very clear this is different, and it was almost given sort of like a bad taste, right? Everything else, I'm like, gosh, I don't know, like which one of you brought this up? I mean, was it finance? Was it school committee? Was it select board? Was it someone on planning and development? Like, who thought this was a good idea for Shrewsbury? Because I live here and I don't think this is a good idea. So I'd like to know who in this room thought this was a good idea. I don't know. 170 truck bays? I don't think that's a good idea for a residential neighborhood. I don't know.
It goes back to the checklist, right?
Right.
It's like, who benefits?
Yeah.
Who benefits from this? And it's funny that, you're right, when it's a citizen petition, we're very clearly well known that it's a citizen petition. Everything else, it's sort of like, who came up with this idea? Who put it on as a warrant? Who was the impetus, right? I think it's fair to say a lot of that is not well known to the town meeting members in the room.
Right.
Well, I think we've kind of completed here our analysis of, I think, the process of town meeting. So I think we're pretty much out of time for today's episode, but I definitely think we're going to spend more time in the next episode of the Unselects talking about the articles that we found were important at town meeting, and we're going to dig into those in a lot more detail. So please join us on the next episode of the Unselects. And I'm Greg Richards.
I'm Brian Costello.
And I'm Caroline Macomber, Precinct 9.
Thank you.
Thanks.